Welcome to the Free Will, Science, and Religion podcast. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here today with George Ortega, and we're going to be talking about the logistics, the details of how we're going to get this podcast out there and bring in co-hosts and all that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Okay, so like right now, there's I think about 10 or 11 of us. Not all of us have been on podcasts yet, but basically what this episode we want to devote to like we've developed a kind of like a protocol for how we communicate about this, how we just kind of like you know um arrange for the recordings and how we upload them all. So that's Chandler and I are going to use this time to explain to you how we do this in order to encourage you to join us. In other words, right now we have 10 or 11 co-hosts. Our minimum goal is to have 14, so we have like, an average of like two people doing a podcast every day. But again, we'd want to get like 20, 30, as many co-hosts as possible, just to give the audience as much of a variety of this exploration of free will as we can.
Yes, and there's a benefit to doing that because when you see that there's different people who live in different places who have different religious or political affiliations, and yet they all understand that free will is an illusion and they don't blame each other for their differences. This has a tremendous impact because I have very strong disagreements with some of our other co-hosts, for example, about the subject of abortion or euthanasia or capital punishment, those sort of life and death issues, those tend to be the things that people disagree on, but we can discuss them peacefully because we're not blaming each other. Like, you should just choose to believe and do as I do. And I'm like, well, it's so weird because under the free will belief, you blame people for being immoral because what they think is right is not the same thing as what you think is right. So I've become a lot less I don't know what's the word for it. I've just become a lot less hostile.
Judgmental.
Yes, I've become a lot less judgmental and hostile towards those who disagree with me.
I agree, and I've felt the same thing. I've done like a TV show here in White Plains and in Manhattan for several years with my co-host, and Nick. Sometimes Nick will just like he won't let me finish a sentence. Like he constantly interrupts me, and it's driven me mad sometimes. And like the cool thing is like I constantly remind myself, wait a minute, it's not up to him. It would be like so incongruous for me to kind of like really get angry with him when the theme of this show is that like nothing is up to any of us, and because of this we should be much more understanding. So it is very helpful in that way.
Yeah, the funny thing is if I was dealing with Nick, probably what I would end up doing if I had audio recordings, I would just silence out the times when he interrupted me.
Well, yeah, that works, but like, for example, like we do like the Manhattan show is live, and it's not
Yeah.
just a matter of silences. If you're trying to say something and then he's kind of like saying something midstream, it just makes it much harder to finish what one's saying.
Well, yeah, and you've had to tell him to shut up before.
Oh yeah.
and
But again, go ahead.
yeah, but you're not mean about it. It's just a thing. Well, I've got to say this thing, so you need to shut up. And
That's
yeah.
Yeah, Chandler, that's what I was going to say. Exactly. I tell him to shut up. And I've stopped doing that also because, like, I don't want it to be misconstrued and all. But yes, in the way it came across, it was kind of like, just playful in a sense. Absolutely. All right.
uh,
Let's get back. So basically, this is our 10th, I think, or so podcast in a week or so. And I want to just tell the audience, like, one thing we do is we have a Sunday group call. There's usually about 5 or 6 of us on the line, and we actually decided as an experiment to create podcasts of these group calls, and I think it went well. So I think we're going to continue to do that as well.
yeah, it's great. I thought it was very interesting. We had Felicia last time, and yeah, she was. I don't remember exactly anymore what she was saying, but I just remember it was very interesting.
Oh yeah, and another thing. So like for these like 10 podcasts, every one of us understands that free will is an illusion. We haven't had one person yet that believes in free will, but I think we want that to happen. So if you're listening out there, if you want to be a guest on this podcast, just contact any of us. Again, any of the 10 of us up, because what happens is like we all like right now, Chandler and I are doing a podcast. We're both going to upload this podcast to the Internet Archive and YouTube. So there'll be two versions. So just contact one of us, and Chandler, what's it? I'm thinking that eventually, we might even have some free will believers as co-hosts, where we won't. I don't think it would be a good idea to allow them to do an episode on their own like Gary does. Gary does these episodes where he just like he doesn't use a co-host, but he understands that free will is an illusion. So like if we ultimately have free will believers as co-hosts on the podcast, yeah, if we pair them up with somebody who understands that free will is an illusion, then I think the audience can like get a better perspective of why free will is an illusion, because we'd have more arguments to be able to kind of like address and answer.
Yes, this is actually very interesting because part of the problem is that when you have only people on a podcast or show or whatever who are all already of the same opinion on a certain matter, well, then you don't get to hear the debate, and the debate is actually good. But what I find is you either have people like us that are, like hard determinists or free will impossibilists or incompatibilists, and you're like, we know that free will is an illusion, but then people think that it's all just our club here, and they think that if some libertarian came and told us that free will is true because determinism is false, that suddenly they would beat our logic or something. And then you also hear, whole sermons in churches and stuff about free will and how God gave us free will. So I think the two views need to come together so that people get to hear it. For example, I think it was good, like say when Ken Ham and Bill Nye were debating the creation evolution thing. I thought it was very, very interesting because then you're hearing two completely opposite guys take turns saying what they say. And I think that's more interesting than listening to either of those guys solo.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, Chandler. Are you still there? Something
Yeah,
cut? Oh, good.
yeah, I'm still
Excellent.
here.
Okay, so yeah, and so here's the thing, like we it may take us a bit of a while to reach out to free will believers and persuade them to be guests on the show, but like another way we can approach this is like what Gary did in one of his podcasts recently. Basically, he went to a YouTube video, I think it was a 15-minute video or something, where a guy was defending free will, and basically he went to the comments section. There must have been like 10, 20 comments, and he just basically read the comments that were kind of like defending free will, and he would basically offer his responses as to why these comments were mistaken, why the logic was flawed and all. So I think that's another way that doesn't necessarily require that we actually have a guest on, where we could be like presenting the arguments for free will and describing why they don't make sense, why they don't really defend free will.
Yes, it's an excellent idea, really. Because yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've wanted to do, if I ever figured out the right way to do it, is I've wanted to tear apart compatibilism and just how mistaken it is.
Well, absolutely. Kant, I think, called it a wretched subterfuge. And I think William James, who was the founder of American psychology, called it a quagmire of evasion. I mean, it makes no sense at all. Basically, compatibilists, just for our audience, compatibilists, for the most part, say that they acknowledge that everything has a cause, that everything is deterministic, that everything is a result of cause and effect. Yet they continue to defend free will, and like as Chandler and I, will point out, the only way they can do that is by redefining the term free will, so it makes no sense. So it actually has nothing to do with what the current debate is about and what the debate has been about for a couple of thousand years.
Yes, it the all the types of compatibilism that I've encountered don't truly allow for the whole moral responsibility and deservingness that free will believers require, basically.
Yeah, well, a compatibilist, some compatibilists will say, well, yes, everything is causal, everything is deterministic, but we're still fundamentally responsible because, like, nobody is coercing us. There's nobody that's making us do what we do. That reasoning completely ignores and evades the fact that our genetics and actually, it's impossible to evade the influence of others in who we are and how we develop to be what we are. So actually, we are being coerced by society in our beliefs and in our actions and all.
Yes, I mean it's true. Peop just the fact that we have laws, and that people don't do certain things because they don't want to be sent to jail. They don't want to get in trouble with the law. They don't want to get in trouble with other people. So people are still coerced. There may not be a person holding a gun to your head, but there's still threats. There's still fears of how people will treat us if they know that our religions are different and or something like that. That you disagree with them politically or something. Some people are mean like that.
I hear you. All right, so let's get back to like the logistics of our podcast to attract more co-hosts. So like if you want to be a co-host, basically our minimum commitment is if you're able to do two podcasts, 2 half-hour podcasts each month, then you can be a co-host. So that's I think a reasonable minimum expectation. And like beyond that, it's not completely necessary, but what we're doing, for example, like on this podcast, Chandler and I are both recording this, because like, Chandler's in Missouri, I'm in New York, we're in completely different places. If you want to you can co-host from England, from Australia, from anywhere you live. And so like basically what we do is like we both record it, and then ideally we look for the best of the two recordings, but if both of them come out well, then we'll just both upload them to Internet Archive. It's a free website that hosts both video and audio. And then we use this panel that one of our co-hosts, Trick Slattery, created. It's an excellent panel for our podcast. And then we make a video of this podcast and upload it to YouTube. So that's really the two requirements of being a co-host, that you co-host twice a month, and then you upload the episode that you've co-hosted to your account. It's your personal account. And eventually, once this gets going, we're still in preview now. In sometime in April, we'll launch this officially. But at that time, then we're going to have an official YouTube channel and an official iTunes channel, an official Internet Archive channel. But until then, we're just like uploading it to our own individual accounts. And again, it's a kind of like it's an endeavor with minimal requirements, and also we want this to be fun. We don't want this to be work.
Yes, this is very excellent, and I want to mention for people who aren't aware of how we're recording this is we are doing it through Skype calls, and we're using a program called MP3 Skype Recorder. And what's really awesome about that is that let's say that other people they aren't necessarily interested in being our co-host, but they still have an idea for a podcast or something. Well, they need to know that there's software tools out there that enable you to do podcasts recorded with people who live in different places. So I just thought I want to mention the tools we're using for this.
Yes, Chandler, and also like we should mention that both Skype and MP3 Skype Recorder are free.
Yes.
You download them from the Skype website and from I think it's like allvoipcalling.com for the MP3 Skype Recorder, and so it's all free, and absolutely, and in terms of the logistics of scheduling. For example, like we've created a calendar online that when you become a host, a co-host, we'll give you a link to how you can access this calendar. And then let's say, for example, you're free. Right now, we're recording this on a Tuesday. Let's say on a Friday afternoon, you'd be free to record a podcast. Then what would you do is you would just put your name and the suggested time on the calendar for Friday, and between now and Friday, any of the other co-hosts who's also free at the time would see that you're available at that time, put their name there, and then we're also exchanging emails, so they could contact you with email or through Skype or something, and you might want to talk about how, if you're going to have a theme on the show or not. So basically the logistics of organizing this, we're kind of like streamlining it to make it as simple and effortless as possible.
Yeah, yeah. This is so awesome. I mean, I I'm just overwhelmed by the power that the internet allows for this information to spread because I have to say, George, if it weren't for the internet, then there's so many things we couldn't do, but now there's no limit to information. The world's changing partly because of this.
Oh, Chandler, yeah, I think, like if it weren't for the internet, the kind of initiative that we've undertaken over the last several years, whatever, it wouldn't really be possible. Because in other words, like, especially with like, part of the internet is like Amazon create space self-publishing. That didn't exist, a couple of decades ago, a decade ago or so, whatever. So like back then, without the internet and without these self-publishing tools, it would have been pretty impossible for people to to refute, to challenge free will in the mainstream press, because like people would have thought, oh no, this is like an assault on our belief systems, like they wouldn't have allowed it. So the free will, yeah, the internet just gives us that freedom.
Yeah, I really like that. It's kind of funny how we realize that we don't that our will isn't free, but we have more other types of freedom to make up for it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, actually, Chandler, that's a good point, because a lot of times one of our challenges in explaining to the world why nothing is up to any of us, why we don't have a free will, is in really explaining what the term free will means. Because like, a lot of times people will take free will to mean, for example, political freedom. That in other words, like, just because here in the United States we're freer to say what we want than people, let's say in China, then that for some reason that means that we have more free will than the people in China, which it's confusing.
Oh yeah, but believe okay, George, this is crazy. But yeah, I had this Catholic Facebook friend who said I had free will because I could post on Facebook, and is saying, well, you're free to do what you want, so you have free will. And I'm like, that's not what we're talking about. Because we're talking about whether our will is actually free to be different things, even that it can somehow function independently of our circumstances, our genetics and conditioning. We're not talking about political freedom or how much freedom you have to post things on Facebook. We're not talking about that.
Exactly. And this point is so important. I mean, like at the beginning of all my TV episodes and of the episodes of the Manhattan Live call-in TV show, we actually define what we mean by free will. We may want to start doing this, Chandler, on these podcasts, just at least briefly at the beginning of the podcast, just give a definition, because like, and in addition to that, I think we may want to devote an entire podcast to defining, free will, to what people mean by it. Because again, there are various definitions, but there's one generally accepted definition that the debate has been about for at least centuries. And that's the one. So people need to understand that, what free will means. And essentially, basically, free will means that we're able to do what we want to do without anything that's not in our control preventing us. That's the real definition. It's not about political freedom. It's not about, we've got to like make a list of all the different kind of like misdefinitions of free will that are out there in order to be able to correct them.
Yeah, there's a general idea that free will, as we are defining, is like where basically it's up to you. it's not up to anything outside of you that's making you do what you do.
Right. And some of these crazy compatibilists, they'll say, well, like, even let's say you have like a genetic disposition. Let's say, well, what is that condition where you just like a person will start shouting obscenities and all? Um, Tourette's syndrome.
Yeah, I think they call it Tourette's, but I'm not sure.
Tourette's, exactly. All right, so basically, they would be saying that somebody with Tourette's syndrome, even though they have this condition that they're not in control of, the compatibilists would say, well, because it is the person that's doing that, that's shouting these obscenities and stuff, they're responsible for it because they have a free will to stop. And it's completely nonsensical.
It really is because you may be aware of this, but there are people who deny mental illness. They're saying that it's your choice whether you're bipolar or have Tourette's or have epilepsy or autism. They're saying that, and depression's a choice. People blame people for being depressed and that kind of stuff.
No, I know, and like you could even extend that claim to like physical illnesses, like people who have heart disease or lung cancer or something like that are somehow choosing that. I mean, it's an insane kind of like assertion.
Yeah, I mean, and it,
Absolutely.
it completely ignores all sorts of environmental factors that those people never could have chosen. Take, for example, people who are born with a sexually transmitted disease or fetal alcohol syndrome or something, that happened before they were even born that affected them for the rest of their life. How can you hold them responsible for that?
Exactly, and that's why this show is so important. The free will belief, not only is it like fundamentally, categorically, completely wrong, it's also completely unjust and leads to a lot of unnecessary blame and accusations and suffering and all. It's really, really a very harmful belief.
Yeah.
All right, Chandler, I think something else we want to go through is like, in addition to the calendar, we have a forum that we've set up. It's on freeforums.org. It's not listed yet. We've got to like get that done, but basically we use that for communicating. In other words, like let's say you're a co-host and you have you recorded and uploaded a show today, right? So then you'd go to this sticky forum entry on this or whatever, this forum site, and basically you'd write down a comment that saying the fact that like on this day I recorded this episode and including a link. And then because like the other part of this is that like we're numbering the episodes. Like right now, I'm not sure whether this is number episode 10 or 11 because I'm not sure whether Gary has done one episode today or two, and Chandler, you and I did one yesterday. So in other words, this forum is another way for us to keep track of our numbering system and to keep track, with links to the episodes of what the other co-hosts are doing. We're really kind of like making this very, very, user friendly. So like again, so like we want to like spend as little time on the work of this as possible and really have this be a very, very enjoyable, streamlined, seamless kind of like a project.
Yes, we want it to be easy. It shouldn't be a stressful thing, really. Because, I mean, and that's the great thing. What I think that there's an enjoyment to be found in stuff that you're not getting paid for. It's not. It's kind of a funny thing, because in a certain way, I'm it's even though I don't have free will, I'm more free about this project than say at my job, where I'm sacking groceries, because at least I'm doing this because I want to, and it's not like it's a threat of like, well, I need to make money, and so I have to work this job even if I hate the job, Although I do like my job, I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, no, and actually they've done studies. Even when you like your job, they've done studies that when one is being paid to do something, one will generally not appreciate it or derive as much enjoyment as if one were not getting paid. And that's what, yeah, yeah, we're all volunteers and we're doing this, out of our intrinsic motivation. It's It's not for any kind of personal, external reward, and that makes it much more rewarding. Absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. I think that that's the kind of freedom that we want, that can happen, is that at least that we're doing what we like to do, and it's not because we're being paid. It's at least we in a certain sort of way. Yeah, sure. No one is holding a gun to my head in this sort of case, but I am internally compelled by my desire to talk about the deep questions of philosophy and science and religion. And I just find it interesting. I really find the subject of why people do what they do to be interesting.
Oh yeah, and you just made a great point. I mean, like a lot of our show is like, in a certain sense, it's about taking something from people. In other words, taking from them this cherished belief that they have a free will. But we have to remember that it's also about giving people a freedom that they don't yet have. In other words, like this burden of personal responsibility, this burden of having to blame other people. That's like basically to the extent we overcome the belief in free will, we become free from this burden of blaming and feeling guilty. So it's a
Yes.
huge freedom we're giving people. Yes.
Yes, it's kind of ironic because you wouldn't think about that, because what happens is, well, sure, on one hand we're telling people that they don't have the freedom to just think and feel whatever they want and change their own desires and ignore their entire past that compels them to be the way they are. But at the same time, once you have accepted that, you stop blaming yourself, you stop feeling so guilty, and you actually enjoy life more because you're able to do what you want, and you don't feel so bad about everything, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. The world needs to understand that we're doing this for two primary reasons. The first, I think, in my mind, is to help create a better world, a world with less suffering, less blame, less guilt, less of the harm that the free will belief causes. And the second reason is that it's about truth. It's about a fundamental fact of human behavior. It doesn't seem wise for our world to almost completely believe that we have this free will. Almost all of us have this belief when the exact opposite is true. I mean, it seems in terms of just basic, truth and understanding, it seems like it's a very, very useful way to really like have our consciousness, reflect the true nature of reality, and instead of some kind of like delusional perspective.
Yes, and here's what's interesting about it, because there's no freedom in the truth, in the sense that we don't choose what's true. We don't choose what is real and what isn't. So that's an interesting thing. And yet I'm all for this so-called, political freedom to seek the truth, and that I don't want information, like I don't want books banned, information restricted, because I think that everyone finds the truth if they keep looking hard enough.
Okay, that's a good point. So we've got about a minute and a half left. Again, we're looking for co-hosts. If you want to like co-host, if you want to help us explain to the world why nobody has a free will, why this issue matters, we're going to be doing podcasts on why this isn't just a trivial point. It matters greatly. Or if you believe you have free will and you want to explore this issue with us, just contact us and we'll put you on a podcast.
Yes.
Okay, Chandler, we've got about a minute left.
I don't know what to say. I think
Well,
we've
I
said it
don't
all.
either, and I suppose if we had a free will, maybe we would.
Yeah, hey, that reminds me. Sometime we need to do that podcast, like if we had a free will, we would do this and that.
Oh yeah, like Nick Vale does, right? If
Yeah,
I had a free will, I would be like an Australian hockey player or a
yeah, yeah.
Chinese gymnast.
If I had a free will, then I wouldn't have embezzled that money and weird stuff like that.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. The cool thing about this, Chandler, is like there's so many themes that are relevant to this question of free will. It applies to our personal lives, to our societal lives, to our world in general.
Yeah, and it's entertaining too.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. All right, this is great. I mean, so like, all right, everybody. So like, I guess we're gonna sign off. So we'll see you again, like on the next episode of what is it? Free will, science and
Science.
religion.